Have you ever played the game Guess Who? It's an oldie, I admit. According to the good old World Wide Web, it has been around since the late 70s or the early 80s. And I can personally remember playing this game with my cousins when I was a kid. It's a 2-player game that's essentially like 20 questions. You each draw a card with a picture of a person on it, and then you ask your partner yes or no questions to determine who your opponent's person is from a board of 20 or 30 people to choose from. So I might say, does your person have glasses? Does your person have red hair? And through a process of elimination, I figure it out eventually. I guess who the opponent of my opponent's card is. So what in the world does this have to do with a story about Jesus and his disciple Peter? Well, let's dive in as we look at today's theme, Believe Who Jesus Is. Well, if you have played Guess Who, you can probably remember it's pretty quick, it's pretty simple. We were eventually given this game as well, and like I said, it's been around forever. And I can remember getting sick of it, getting sick of playing it with my kids. I mean, there are only so many questions that you can ask about the character's physical appearances, which is, I know, why it's designed for a 6-year-old. But see, I have some friends who also were given this game, and they have a good sense of humor. And so in order to keep this game more interesting, they started to ask subjective questions, such as, does your person enjoy long walks on a beach? Or, does your person watch foreign films? Now, I am positive that the game company Hasbro did not work these types of questions into the rules, because the only questions you can really ask are based on what you can see in these cartoon pictures. Things like who has a hat or who has a beard or a mustache. But the simplicity of a game like this reminds us that there is only so much we can learn about a person through what we can see. In today's Bible story, we are again in the book of Matthew. And after Jesus came down that mountain where he delivered this sermon, all these important things to say, a lot actually happened. Jesus heals someone with leprosy, someone who was paralyzed. Jesus heals another man who was blind, a woman who had been bleeding her whole life, and a young girl who everyone thought was dead. Then Jesus says to his disciples, I give you my power of healing. He sends them out to travel to other towns, saying, anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. He gives the disciples power and authority and leadership. We hear that Jesus feeds 5,000 people, a crowd of people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. The people continue growing that are following him. They simply cannot believe what they've experienced. And eventually, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders of this day, they get suspicious. They see that Jesus does things differently. He's teaching that their religious rules can be understood in different ways, and ultimately they feel threatened by this. So we learn at the beginning of chapter 16 in Matthew that these leaders demand that Jesus show them a sign from heaven. If he is truly God's son, like people are saying, they want Jesus to prove it. We can see that tension is growing, but Jesus continues traveling with his disciples. And then we read in verse 13, Jesus wants to know what it is that the disciples are hearing. He says, who do people say that I am? And the disciples, they give answers that would have been expected from that time of day. Some say John the Baptist. Others say that you are Elijah. Others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And this would have made sense because it was common for others to compare Jesus to important people from Jewish history. The disciples were likely repeating what they had heard people say about Jesus, but Jesus doesn't let it stay there. He doesn't want the disciples to be okay with what everyone else says. He makes it personal. He wants to hear from his friends, the ones who have spent the most time with Jesus. But what about you, Jesus asks. Who do you say that I am? And that's when Simon Peter, who we also know as the disciple Peter, that's when he speaks up. And Peter declares exactly what he believes about Jesus. He says, you are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. And remember that conversation we had last time about sand and rocks? Well, we come back to a conversation about rocks as a foundation because Jesus tells Peter that he is the rock which the entire church will be built on. With this one response, with Peter's ability to speak honestly about who Jesus is to him, it influenced the entire future of the church. So today I invite you to think about finding the courage to declare what you believe about Jesus. And remember, you don't have to have the right words to describe what you believe. There are plenty of words that other people have for a life of faith, but what are yours? If you're moving along this roadmap with us on your own, write them down. What do you believe about Jesus, or who do you know Jesus to be? Or maybe you're journeying with your small group or with your kids. You could ask one another, and it might surprise you. It might change you too. Thanks so much for being here today.